Hi everyone, it's Will with the 1921 Grand Duke Dmitri Diary Series, and we're up to the big day that Dmitri was actually nervous about, the beginning of his trip with Coco Chanel to the Riviera. So a recap, we did the 21st of March diary entry in two parts, and so in the second part of that, Dmitri met separately with first with his cousin Infanta Beatrice, who'd been born, I think she was a princess of Saxe-Gotha, I don't know, Saxe-Gotha-Coburg, I don't know. Her father was a son of Queen Victoria, who also had a German dukedom, and she and her husband Ali, Infanta Alfonso of Spain, were on their way for a trip to England. And so he met with them, and then he went to the Ritz and met with his cousin Alexander Mountbatten and Alexander's wife Irene. And Alexander had the family nickname of Drino. And yeah, so we had visits with both of those. They were both just in transit, both couples. Drino and Irene were on their way to Spain. And yeah, baby B and Ollie were on their way to England. Okay, so, you know, I was initially a little surprised when Dmitri actually used the words that he was feeling a little scared about the trip with Coco, because he was such a man of the world. But when I look back at everything I know about him and his relationships, I realized that this was pretty different from anything that he'd done before. My dog is pulling the cushions off the couch, but all right, he does that just about every day. Yeah, it was different because he had unmarried mistress Coralli from the Demi-Monde, and he had, you know, a variety of married women that he'd had affairs with. But had he ever had a relationship with anyone quite like Coco? Duke! That's one drawback to having a Great Dane. They will move furniture and do other things like that if they're bored. Okay, and I don't know that he'd ever been in quite a situation like this with this very independent woman, this very successful woman, who didn't at all have the kind of personality, as far as I know, where she would be leaning on a man for you know, I don't know, to meet her her needs, to have someone taking care of her. I don't know, maybe she did, but doesn't seem to have. Anyway, the cast for today's diary entry, nobody knew. So that is nice, because things are a little less complicated when that's the case. Okay, so we can get right down to it. It's the 22nd of March, 1921, a Tuesday, and Dmitri writes that he is between Paris and Menton. Okay, here we go. Gulevich came to see me in the morning. He really wanted to persuade me not to go to Monte Carlo, but to stay in Paris. Naturally, his pleas were in vain. I lunched at the Ritz Grill with Coco. May was there, of course. She was desperate to know where I was going and was very interested in the fact that Coco happened to be leaving too. Around 2 o'clock, I went to Maria's and we took a walk in the Bois. The weather was ideal. The buds were coming out and the grass was growing. It was actually warm. Around 5 o'clock, I went to the Travelers. I saw Bob there and then went home to change. I dined at 7 o'clock at Maria's, then went to the station and left at 8:15. I experienced a few tense moments because I couldn't find Coco anywhere and thought she would miss the train. Turned out that she had simply locked herself in her compartment and was sitting by herself in there. Naturally, I stayed with her until quite late, then went to my own compartment, which was in another carriage. Okay, and I forgot to mention that before I had said that they were going to drive to the Riviera and do it as a road trip. And I was wrong about that. You know from previous videos that the road trip was to Rouen. It was a relatively short one, just an overnight trip, so that they could get the feel of the Rolls, the new Rolls Royce. And in fact, someone will be delivering the Rolls to the Riviera. So, yeah, they're taking the train. It would probably have been a very, very long drive that required multiple stops because it's going to be a long train trip, as it turns out. So Gulevich is the first person who appears that morning, General Arseny Anatolyevich, and if I recall correctly, he was one, Galeevsky, Gulevich, two other people, one of whom may have been Shirinsky, were the core members of Dmitri's intelligence group, his information bureau, which seems to have been more or less disbanded. I mean, not officially, I think, but it seems like Dmitri just wasn't interested anymore. After what happened in Berlin, he just wasn't going to play around with things like that anymore. So apparently, judging by Gulevich, people did know that he was leaving town. Gulevich certainly knew and didn't want him to. I don't know why he felt it was important to stay, for Dmitri to stay in Paris, because his, here he is, it sounds like practically pleading with Dmitri to stay in Paris. But apparently he just wasn't getting the message that Dmitri wasn't, he was done with all that. Okay, so May and Coco seem to continue to be friends. They're developing their friendship. Coco does not, unlike Gulevich, does not know where Dmitri's going. She just knows that Dmitri is going somewhere, and that by chance, apparently, unrelatedly, Coco is also going somewhere, and so she's starting to put two and two together, and apparently Dmitri did not tell her where he was going, which is, of course, also where Coco is going. So the question I have is, did Maria know that he was going? And she obviously knew that he was going to be taking a trip because she saw him almost every day, and I'm sure she knew that he was going to the Riviera. The big question is, did she know he was going with Coco? Because I don't think Maria was really involved with Coco at this stage. If I recall correctly from her memoirs, she sort of intimates that she was the one, that she was involved with Coco, and that it was through her that Dmitri met Coco, whereas Dmitri says, as you know from earlier diary entries, that he met Coco all the way back before the war in 1914, and they resumed their acquaintanceship in Paris in 1921. Anyway, it's an open question. Did Maria, she knew that Dmitri had been seeing her, had been seeing Coco. Did she know that they were going off together? Did he tell her that? I wouldn't be surprised if he told her that. And if I recall correctly, he mentions that in one of the diary entries to come, and we find out definitively whether or not Maria really knew what was going on. Okay, then we have the brief stop at the Travelers. Bob, whom Dmitri runs into there, is Bob Luders, who seems to have been a real habitué of the Travelers, which Dmitri was too when he was in Paris kicking around and didn't have anything in particular to do. So then there's this bit of a mix-up at the train station. Dmitri has a few minutes of worry, because he gets there and apparently he expected to find Coco on the platform or in the whatever enclosure they had for people who were waiting, and she wasn't there. She was, as he puts it, locked in her compartment. So why would that be the case? Well, I think, and I wonder, I don't know for sure, but I wonder if she was if at that point in 1921 she had that sort of celebrity in Paris, that she was already someone that people would recognize and sort of throng around. and maybe she got on the train and made a beeline for her own compartment and sort of locked herself in because she didn't want anybody coming and saying, "Oh, you're Coco Chanel, give me your autograph," or whatever people did. So yeah, maybe that was the case. And of course, Dmitri could not, in 1921, text her. That makes our life so much easier now. He couldn't text her and say, "Where the heck are you?" But he figured it out. And then we find out from him that they had actually, not only did they have separate compartments, which makes sense, but they actually were in different train carriages. And I think that was probably deliberate. You know, I think they were, as you'll hear more about later, they were trying to keep it under wraps, the relationship. And they could easily have run into people, either one of them could have run into people that they knew going to the Riviera. It would not have been, maybe that time of year, not that common, at the end of March. And since Dmitri is using the old calendar, it actually would have been a little later. It would have been in April, but that's probably, I'm guessing that's not high season in on the Riviera. But anyway, they could very well have just run into people that they knew. And so I think they didn't want to be seen, you know, going in and out of adjoining compartments. But maybe I'm wrong about that, because they were, you know, there was still a pretty high risk, I would think, if there was anybody they knew on the train, that they would be seen. But yeah, it's neither here nor there, because I don't know. Okay, so what will we have in the diary entry of the 23rd? Well, they will arrive in Menton, and they will immediately run into some complications. And so the last thing you want when you're traveling, after a long trip, and you arrive somewhere and you just want to go to your hotel and relax, and it doesn't work out that way. So we will find out about that next time, and I hope to see you then. Bye.